Hi, everyone. So today's session is on Graham's Port. I am Vicky Symington, fifth generation of the Symington family working in the port trade, and also currently Graham's brand manager. So today's session, as I said, is on Graham's Port. So we'll go a little bit into the brand, its history, the quintas that make up the Graham's Ports, as well as the specific products that I know at Hotel de Vin and Malmaison you serve of Graham's. So 6 grapes, 10 and 20-year-old, as well as the blend series. So blend number 5 and blend number 12. So Graham's was founded in 1820. It was founded by brothers William and John Graham. Originally, it was founded they traded textiles. And actually, they accepted 27 barrels of port as a payment for a debt of one of their customers. And this was really where Graham's began. They then took these 27 barrels of port and began trading them, and their appreciation for port grew. From then on, they decided to devote their energies into making the best port wine from the Douro Valley, and so Graham's began. Graham's was actually one of the first port companies to invest in vineyards in the Upper Douro. So previously, port companies mostly would just trade. And in 1890, which is one of the most significant years for the brand, they acquired Quinta dos Malvedos, which we'll see a little bit later on. Quinta dos Malvedos is Graham's flagship estate, and it was a pioneering and very far-sighted move for the brand. So as I said, 1890 was a very relevant year for the brand. In this exact same year was the year that the lodge that we have here in Vila Nova de Gaia was constructed. And this is where all of Graham's Port have been stored and aged since. So if any of you have come to Porto, definitely recommend having a look and going around the lodge. It's a very impressive space where all of our barrels, all our aged tawnies have been aging throughout the years since 1890. So today, Graham's is renowned for producing outstanding wines. We source grapes from 4 exceptional estates in the Douro Valley. Again, I'll go into these 4 a little bit later. And each of these estates contributes to Graham's signature opulence and well-balanced finish. So each of the different estates is very important. They all have very slightly different profiles. The vineyards are slightly different, and it's the combination of this that really gives us the Graham's signature, the signature feel and the signature profile of the wines. So Graham's today continues to lead the way by innovating in areas of culture, viticulture, and winemaking. We have an accrued understanding of the terroir of all of our vineyards. Graham's has always been at the forefront of innovation, not only in viticulture and winemaking, but also in packaging and presentation of our wines. The Symington family, my grandfather and his cousins were the ones who actually invented automatic lagars that are used in our wineries. These automatic lagars were developed to exactly replicate foot treading. So port wine was always traditionally made using foot treading, and obviously it's no longer a long-term viable and sustainable option as we have less workers, particularly in the Douro Valley, which is a very remote area. So it allows greater control in our fermentation process, and these automatic lagars were created with that in mind. So we have sort of silicone feet at the bottom, which replicate exactly a foot, so exactly the same pressure, but not hard enough to break the pips inside the grapes. Graham's was also the first port brand to move towards, in the aged tawnies, move towards the see-through, more spirit style, sort of shorter bottles that I'm sure you're aware of. It was the first brand to do that, and nowadays you'll see that most tawnies from many other brands have followed in the same direction, as this was incredibly successful for the popularity of aged tawnies. Graham's is owned 100% by the Symington family. So alongside the other port brands in the SFE portfolio, namely Coburn's, Dow's and War, it is the last remaining port producer of British origin to be in the hands of a single family. So currently 10 of the Symington family from the 4th and 5th generation are actively involved in Graham's today. And this is actually always a very interesting time, for the brands, as it's a time that we see sort of a culmination of the depth of knowledge and experience of the 4th generation with a sort of fresh and young perspective of the 5th generation. And it really was this culmination that led to the birth of products like blend number 5 and blend number 12, which have been very successful and a sort of good vehicle to bring in younger consumers and people who are not so familiar with port or more traditional port styles. So as we look to the future, Graham's is over 200 years old. So it was, as I said earlier, established in 1820, and actually in 2020, which unfortunately was COVID, the brand had a lot of sort of events and activations and things set up to celebrate that year. And obviously for obvious reasons, everything was cancelled. But the brand is very much about the past, the present, but also the future. So we are committed to producing the finest single harvest tawny ports, vintage ports, and using our deep understanding of the Graham's vineyards. We have a B Corp certification, Symington Family Estates in general, so we work consistently to make improvements to support a healthy environment and the local communities where we work. And our aim is to continue to push the boundaries by adapting port blends, product presentations, and appeal to a modern port consumer, whilst very importantly remaining true to our heritage and our more traditional consumer. So Graham's Port has, as I said earlier, 4 principal estates where the grapes are sourced for all of our wines. The flagship estate is Quinta dos Malvedos. So Quinta dos Malvedos has essentially been the cornerstone of all of Graham's top and particularly vintage ports since it was acquired in 1890. The property has taken its name from the rapids, which ran in front of the house before the Douro River was dammed in the early 1960s. So Malvedos translates to Portuguese quite literally as bad rapids. The estate is around just over 160 hectares. And it's really well situated in a transition zone between the Cima Corgo and the Douro Superior subregions of the Douro Valley. So this really brings together the best of both. So in the Cima Corgo, it's known to have a little bit more rainfall, whereas the Douro Superior has abundant sunshine. And here we get that great balance where we have that abundant sunshine, but we also get a good amount of rainfall for the vineyards. So just to show a layout of the vineyards that we have at Quinta dos Malvedos, the vineyard is predominantly south-facing. So it gets ample hours of sunlight, provides even and complete grape ripening, and results in really well-balanced wines. So Malvedos still contains large areas of traditional vineyard laid out on terraces by dry stone walls. So we have the stone terraces, particularly Cardanhos and the Port Arthur stone terraces. So these were built by hand in the 18th century. These terraces actually mostly face northeast, east and west. So it gives these wines from these particular plots a unique identity, which is also pivotal for Graham's as well, to be able to give us that flexibility in being able to produce some of the top quality wines and looking for the profiles that we really want in those wines. There's a few grape varieties that are particularly relevant for Graham's. So we have the Touriga Nacional, which is one of Portugal's most famous grape varieties. It's a very thick-skinned grape. It's rich in colour and tannins. It gives excellent structure and aging capacity to the wines. But it also has these really wonderful and intense flavors that we can quite often find in some of the top quality port wines, but at the same time balanced with being sort of floral and fruity. So characteristics such as black currants, raspberries, complex hints of herbs and licorice, and it doesn't have very high yields. The Douro in general, being a very dry region, doesn't tend to produce very high yielding vineyards. So we have some areas where we have what we call a grape library, grape variety library, where we consistently plant various different grape varieties, ones that already exist in the region, as well as experimenting with other grape varieties which aren't commonly used in the region, and try and adapt and see which of the grape varieties that we're going to be needing more in the future. So one of those relevant grape varieties is actually the Alicante Bouschet, is one that we have noticed. As you can see here, we don't have a huge amount at Malvezos, but I think it's something that we can see definitely growing because it's reacted very well to our climate change research. Some of the other grape varieties that here I think are relevant for Graham's is the Touriga Franca. So this is lighter, a little bit more perfumed than the Touriga Nacional, and really adds a sort of a finesse to the wine. Then we have Tinta Barroca, which you see quite a bit of as well at Malvezos. So this is more sort of plummy cherry fruit flavors, and then Sauzon as well. So Sauzon, actually, we have a little bit of Sauzon in most of our wines. Again, this is a variety that is really helps to bring out the top sort of quality in the wines that we produce at Graham's. So it's used to make relatively light red wine styles, but nonetheless really deeply colored thanks to the strong pigmentation of the grape. This variety has a natural acidity and depth of color that makes it increasingly popular within port because of the profile and the characteristics that it helps to give these wines. So the other three quintas, we've spoken about Quintas Malvezos. The other three of note are Quinta de Tua. So Quinta de Tua was actually from the legendary Dona Antonia Ferreira. Within the port world, she's very well known and actually used to live at Quinta de Vesúvio. And the house itself was built in 1834. And it was actually originally used as a staging post or an inn for travelers on their way further up the Douro Valley. So for many years, it was actually known as the English Quinta, and has since changed to be called Quinta de Tua. So the property has actually been associated for many years with research projects. It's focused on improving the quality of the wines and the ports that we produce there, and also as well in other quintas. So actually the first experimental vineyard was planted at Tua in 1930. Then we have Quinta de Vila Velha. So this is situated a little bit further down the Douro Valley, approximately halfway between Pinhão and Tua. It's on the south bank, so it faces west. The vineyard receives full benefit of the southern sun, and the main vineyard is situated at an ideal altitude. So altitude is very important in the Douro Valley because this influences the acidity of the grapes, but also of the wines as well, which is really important to help give the right balance. And then we have the Quinta de Val de Milhadas, which is owned by my uncle Paul and Dominic and their cousin Rupert. And it's a considerable portion of the property is Mediterranean scrub, and we have olive groves bordering many of the vineyards. So as part of our B Corp and our sustainability and environmental sustainability, we also look a lot at rewilding. So, you know, we generally practice throughout the region minimal intervention, and it's great for us to have other sort of flora and fauna surrounding our vineyards as well. so that we can, increase and support the biodiversity as well in the region. So the Malvidus winery we sort of refer to it as a boutique winery. During the vintage, as you can imagine, we're picking all of the vineyards. Everyone in the Douro region is picking all of the vineyards and trying to get the grapes into the winery in time to be able to ferment and have the best quality wines. We call it a boutique winery because this is where only the very top best quality grapes go. And we don't actually produce all of Graham's wines at this winery. So we concentrate on the highest quality wines, things like vintage port, and then some certain batches of some of our other wines. Our colleagues who work at the winery say it's the only winery that we have the luxury of time. Here, decisions are incredibly important for us to be able to produce those top quality wines that are better than, many of our competitors and even some of our other more mainstream wines. This is incredibly important to be able to have this time for our winemakers to be able to think and make the right decisions. So at Graham's, we use 3 modern lagars. We don't have any of the automatic lagars, only very sporadically for specific lots. These 3 modern lagars are what I was talking about earlier. So they have been developed to replicate exactly foot treading, the traditional method. This allows us to have a lot more control over the production of the wine and actually also produce better quality wines because we don't have limitations of, how many hours it can be working or what times of day or night it has to be working. So it allows us to make decisions and make fast decisions when we see the need. So then I'm going to go into the wines that are particularly relevant for Hôtel de Vars and Malmaison. So Graham's 6 grapes, we call our signature reserve ruby. So the 6 grapes has quite a special story to us and to the brand. And it actually originates in the 19th century. So the Graham's winemakers would mark each barrel of port using grape symbols to rate the wine from 1 to 6. So at the time, the wine was made up in the Douro. That's where it was produced. And then to bring it to Porto, it would be put into barrels and then come down by boat. So the wines would come back down by boat on the river. And they had to assign each of the barrels the quality so that when it arrived in Porto, those who were receiving it knew which wines to put together and where to keep them. So the symbol of the 6 grapes denoted the complexity, structure and balance, and these wines were destined for vintage port, so the very top ports. But not all of them were eventually needed or used for vintage port. So by the early 1900s, Graham started bottling wines selected from these barrels to produce a reserve port like no other. And this was the 6 grapes. So over a century later, the wine continues to be Graham's signature reserve port. So as you can imagine, it continues to be vintage port quality grapes. This wine, I think, is one of the price quality ratio is just outstanding. It's aged in very large wooden vats, as opposed to the smaller ones that we age the tawnies. This maintains the very fruit, blackcurrant forest fruits, black fruit flavor of the wine, as it doesn't have so much contact with the wood. It's a very youthful and fruit-driven style. It is filtered before bottling, so it's not like a vintage, and therefore is no need to decant. So it's ready to drink. When you have the bottle, you can just open it and pour it straight into a glass. And once opened, it remains fresh for actually just a little bit over 1 month, I'd say maybe up to around 6 weeks. You can still continue to drink it after 6 weeks, but it just doesn't have that that great freshness that we sort of want to be seeing coming through the wine. The 6 grapes is great to be paired with chocolate. I think it is one of the best pairings, you know, the best port pairings that exists. As I said, that really sort of the fruit-driven style, the forest fruits, works with, you know, anything from, you know, a chocolate tart to chocolate mousse. Although I would say that the darker the chocolate, the better. The darker the chocolate, the better. And that's because the bitterness in the chocolate really balances well with the sort of the fruity and sweeter flavor and profile of the wine. So then we have the aged tawnies. So the aged tawnies is essentially all about craftsmanship and dedication that are handed down from generation to generation. And with the aged tawnies, we always talk about 3 unique arts, because it starts with the art of cooperage, really, which is the coopers are those who make the barrels. This is an art that has been goes back centuries. Everything is still done by hand. It's very, very skilled, very difficult to find people, you know, with this, you know, skill who continue to do this today. Our barrels are incredibly important because the wines are then aged can be aged for a very long time in these barrels. And actually, we don't throw away any barrels. The sort of older and more used the barrel is, the better it is for us. So every time a barrel, you know, breaks or has a leak, we always go to our team of coopers and they fix the barrel so we can continue using it over and over again. Then we have the art of aging. Again, this is very, must be controlled very well. Obviously, you have different aspects such as, you know, heat, sunlight, etc., that we can't risk these wines spoiling. We have to make sure that they are aged in the right condition. And obviously our winemakers and tasters continually taste these wines in their barrels, you know, every few months to make sure that they're aging in the right way. And then finally, the art of blending. The art of blending is very relevant because as they are aged tawnies, so the 10, 20, 30, 40-year-old, this is an average. So it's an average of 10 years, which means that you can have 50% of a 5-year-old wine and 50% of a 15-year-old wine, and it gives you an average of 10 years. So the blending aspect is very complex. You need to make sure you've got the right wines. It's not always exactly the same wines that you're blending, because as you can imagine, 10 years from now, the wines that will be available will be slightly different from today. And this art is very, very precise, because obviously we want to maintain always our Graham's profile in our 10-year-old. So every year 10-year-old is bottled, and every year we need to make sure that what is bottled is the same profile and the same quality as all of the previous years. So our tasters and our blenders here have a very complex job to make sure that everything is as linear and keeping the quality at the top level. So all of Graham's tawny ports have individual characteristics. They have complex flavors and aromas that pervade each of these unique wines, and have been developed through selecting only our top quality wines from our quintas. And then these are aged in our seasoned oak casks in our 1890 lodge in Vilanova de Gaia, and that is when they are then blended before bottling. So the main difference between the 10 and the 20-year-old, as I'm sure you have figured out from what I just said, is that the 20-year-old on average has spent an extra decade aging in seasoned oak casks. So the 20-year-old has quite a different profile from the 10-year-old. The 10-year-old is obviously a little bit younger. You've got sort of caramel flavors, you've got nutty flavors. The nutty flavors really comes from the wood as well, dried fruit flavors, whereas the 20-year-old has a balance that the oak gives it naturally over time. So again, you will find different nuances of different nutty aromas. You'll probably feel a little bit more oak in the wine. And these wines, these aged tawny wines, are, we always suggest that they're served chilled. So, you know, I personally like to put my aged tawnies in the fridge a few hours before and have it nice and chilled to serve with either with a dessert, or quite often an aged tawny is quite nice as a dessert on its own. So these wines have, as they've been aging in casks, similar to the six grapes, they've actually also oxidized a little bit over time. So this is why they remain fresh for so long once you open these wines. So these wines, again, will remain fresh for about 4 to 6 weeks after you open them. After that, they will begin to lose a little bit of that freshness. When we talk about the aged tawnies and food pairings, I tend to say that rubies, you want things that contrast. So as I said, with the six grapes, you've got the sort of the sweet and the fruity flavor of the wine contrasting with the bitterness of the dark chocolate. With the aged tawnies, we actually look for things that sort of match. So things like creamy, fruity or nutty desserts, things like a creme brulee, an apple tart, some almonds, those sorts of things go really well with the aged tawnies. And then we have the blend series. So the blend series has only been launched over the last few years. It was first launched the blend number 5, and then more recently the blend number 12. So both of these wines represent a really fresh and cutting edge, exciting approach to port. There was nothing really like this on the market for port. It also goes into and explores the sort of the mixology and the cocktail space, which is actually a very interesting space for port, as it's a very versatile drink. It's got these lovely sort of fruity characteristics, and also relevant as well now in the trend is a lot of people are looking to cut their alcohol intake and ABV. When you have you know, a blend number 5, for example, as a port and tonic, it's half the amount of alcohol as if you had a gin and tonic. And I think a lot of people also like this flexibility of being able to, you know, drink something and, you know, it not being as heavy. Or you could even drink more of them without having to, you know, slow down as much as you do when you do with the gin. I think with blend number 5 as well, a lot of the feedback is, you know, how much sort of character and personality it brings to the port and tonic. And then, so as I said, the blend number 5 was the first one that we launched. This was actually the first ever white port that we blended specifically for mixing. So Graham's does have some other white ports, but these were traditionally intended to be drunk on their own, sort of chilled. And actually my family and many other people in Porto are, port and tonic was already, you know, quite a big thing that people drank as an alternative or even preferred to, you know, other drinks or other sort of spirits cocktails. So we decided to launch a white port that was specifically for port and tonic. So we looked for a profile that would really bring out the most and match the best with a tonic. So the main grape varieties here in this white are the Malvasia fina, which is very fresh, and then the Muscatel Gallego, which really has the aromas that you can smell and that you can feel when you're even holding a port and tonic. The reason it's called blend number 5, there's actually 2 reasons, but the main one was that there are 5 elements for the perfect port and tonic. So you've got the white port, tonic, ice, lemon, and mint, fresh sprig of mint, but also at the time of the creation of this product, there were 5 members of the 5th generation who had just recently, within the last sort of 2 years, joined the company, and we're looking for something that would be appealing specifically to a younger consumer. So as I said earlier, you know, we have a very strong base of, you know, Graham's customers who are perhaps a little bit more traditional, or want to alienate them. They're very important to us as a brand, and we wanted something where we could be a little bit more creative, a little bit more risky, and focus solely on the sort of the younger consumer group. And this is where Blend Number 5 was born from. We've also more recently launched the Blend Number 12. So the reason it's called Blend Number 12 is that these grapes are actually picked at midnight from the highest altitude vineyards for the ultimate freshness. So as I said earlier, the altitude is very relevant in the Douro, because the higher you go, the fresher and the more acidity you have in the grapes. And the reason that it's picked at midnight is as the temperature drops and it cools, the grapes also are at a higher acidity level and have more freshness. So if we pick when the temperatures are cooler, hence midnight, we retain that sort of that real freshness that we were looking for specifically for this wine. So it's primarily the indigenous Touriga Nacional variety, so the variety that's more very well known for Portugal, and it's actually cold fermented, which means that it preserves the ultimate aromatic profile that we were looking for. Again, this is a very versatile wine that can be used in many different cocktails. And actually, we've seen many of our customers and mixologists experimenting it and creating some really great cocktails with it. So that's a bit about Graham's and some of the wines. I hope that was useful and interesting for you guys. I was just wondering if you have any questions about anything that I've mentioned, or if there's anything additional maybe that I haven't mentioned that you wanted to know a little bit about.